Emily Carter had never once imagined that a single stupid bet would be the thing to unravel her carefully constructed life. She was 34 years old, a licensed attorney with a corner office on the 18th floor, a woman who had won arguments in federal court and negotiated contracts worth millions without blinking. She did not lose, not at work, not at life, and certainly not at card games with her friends on a Friday night. She had built her world on discipline, precision, and the unshakable belief that everything could be controlled if you were smart enough and stubborn enough to hold the reins. And yet, on a rainy Saturday morning, Emily Carter stood at the edge of a gravel driveway in a town she had never visited, holding a single rolling suitcase, staring at a house that looked like it had been standing since before she was born. She had lost, and now she had to pay. The night it started was supposed to be nothing more than dinner and drinks at Rachel's apartment. Emily had arrived late, as usual, dropping her work bag at the door and reaching immediately for the wine. There were 6 of them around the table, old college friends, spread across different careers and cities. Reunited every few months, when schedules allowed. Conversation was easy and warm and punctuated by laughter, but somewhere around the second bottle of red, the topic had turned to Emily's favorite subject, herself. Not out of vanity, exactly. It was more that Emily had a habit of making every discussion into a debate, and she was extraordinarily good at winning those too. She had been talking about adaptability, about how the mark of a truly capable person was their ability to function in any environment. "I could live anywhere," she had said, with the confident ease of someone who had never been tested. "I could get along with anyone. It's just a matter of mindset." Rachel had raised an eyebrow across the table. "Really?" she had said, her smile slow and knowing. "Anyone?" The room had gone quiet in that particular way it goes quiet when something is about to become interesting. The bet had been Rachel's idea, as most reckless things were. The terms were simple and deliberately absurd. They would play a round of the card game they had played 100 times before. If Emily won, Rachel would cover her tab for the rest of the year. If Emily lost, she would move out of her apartment and spend 3 months living in the home of Noah Bennett, a man Emily had never met, in a small town called Millhaven that Emily could not have placed on a map without help. Noah was Rachel's second cousin once removed, a widower, a former carpenter, and by all accounts the quietest, most unhurried person anyone in their social circle had ever encountered. "He's got a spare room and he's agreed to it," Rachel had said, because apparently she had already made a phone call. "You'll be perfectly safe. He's harmless." Emily had looked around the table at the faces of her friends, all of them trying very hard not to laugh, and she had said yes with the full confidence of someone who had never considered the possibility of losing. She lost on the third hand. The cards were absurdly bad. She sat there staring at them for a long moment, while everyone else around the table began to understand what had just happened. And then the laughter came, warm and helpless and entirely at her expense. Emily had laughed too. Because what else could she do? She had assumed it would blow over. She had assumed that by Sunday the whole thing would be quietly forgotten, that no one would actually hold her to it. But Rachel had filmed the moment Emily agreed. She had captured Emily's exact words, her confident hand gesture, her "I'll take that bet" said with a grin. By Sunday morning, the clip was in the group chat. By Sunday afternoon, 5 of her closest friends were texting her packing advice. Emily spent 2 weeks trying to find a legal loophole. She found none. A promise was a promise. And her friends were relentless. And somewhere beneath the frustration, she recognized that she had brought this entirely on herself. She arranged for her mail to be forwarded. She told her firm she would be working remotely. She packed 1 suitcase with the things she actually needed and left the rest. And on a Tuesday morning in early October, she drove 3 hours north and turned off the highway onto a road lined with oaks that had already begun to turn gold, and she found Millhaven exactly as unhurried and exactly as small as she had imagined it would be. Noah Bennett answered the door before she had a chance to knock. He must have heard the car on the gravel. He stood in the doorway in a gray flannel shirt and worn work boots, a man somewhere in his mid-40s with broad shoulders and calm, steady eyes the color of dark river water. He was not what she had expected. She had constructed a picture in her mind during the drive, filling in the details with assumptions. Someone unkempt, someone awkward, someone obviously in need of company, in a way that would make her feel vaguely guilty for the entire 3 months. Noah did not look any of those things. He looked like a man who had long ago made peace with every room he had ever walked into. "Emily," he said. Not a question, just her name, said simply, "Come in." His handshake was brief and dry, and he was already turning back inside before she had finished adjusting her grip on the suitcase handle. The house was small and it was old, and it was nothing like anything Emily had ever chosen to inhabit. The ceilings were lower than she preferred. The kitchen had open shelving and mismatched mugs, and a wooden table that had been repaired more than once. The grain of the patches visible if you looked closely, but it was clean in the way that things are clean when someone genuinely cares for them rather than when someone is trying to impress. There were plants on the windowsill and books stacked on the side table and a rag rug on the floor of the hallway that had clearly been there for decades. Emily had expected to feel suffocated. Instead, she felt something she could not immediately name. Something close to stillness. She did not say this out loud. She said, "It's cozy," and Noah said, "It works for me." And that was about the length of their first real conversation. The rules of cohabitation were established quietly over dinner that first evening. Noah cooked, which surprised her. He made a simple pasta with roasted tomatoes and fresh herbs from a pot on the back step, and he set 2 places without asking whether she wanted to eat. The rules were not so much stated as they were demonstrated. Noah was up early. He was quiet in the mornings. He did not watch television. He would cook if she wanted him to, but he would not be offended if she cooked for herself. The spare room was hers. The bathroom schedule worked itself out. He asked nothing of her time and offered nothing of his in return except for meals and the occasional calm exchange of words in the kitchen. Emily had expected to feel trapped. She felt, instead, like she had walked into a library after years of living inside a stadium. The silence was strange. It was also, in a way she was not ready to admit, a relief. But the silence also made her restless. Emily was a woman whose mind worked best when it had something to push against. And Noah did not push back. He did not react to her small provocations, the pointed comments she made about the simplicity of the house, or the lack of ambition she assumed was behind it. She had said, on the 3rd evening, something about how she couldn't imagine not having goals, not working towards something bigger. Noah had looked up from the book he was reading and said, simply, "What are you working toward?" She had not answered, because the question, spoken in that particular tone of genuine curiosity, had landed somewhere uncomfortable. He went back to his book. She sat with the question longer than she intended. She noticed the early mornings by the end of the first week. It was not loud, exactly, but the sounds were there if you were a light sleeper. The careful closing of the back door, the low creak of the truck engine turning over in the cold, the crunch of gravel going quiet as he turned onto the road. The first morning she heard it, she assumed he had insomnia. The second morning, she lay awake wondering. By the 5th morning, she was standing at the kitchen window with her hands around a mug of coffee, watching his taillights disappear in the blue-gray dark, and she had made a decision. She followed him the next morning. She told herself it was simple curiosity. She drove at a distance, following without much difficulty through the small and predictable grid of Millhaven's streets. And what she found was not one destination, but several. Noah's first stop was the home of an elderly man named Walter, whose roof had been losing shingles since the last storm. She watched from the street as Noah climbed up with tools she had not noticed him loading, and for an hour and a half in the cold October air, he replaced shingles with the unhurried focus of someone doing exactly the thing they are meant to be doing. He did not look around to see if anyone was watching. He did not take photographs. He climbed down, exchanged a few words with Walter, and left before Walter had finished thanking him. Noah's second stop was a pharmacy on the edge of town, where he picked up prescriptions for a woman named Dottie, whom Emily later learned was 81 and had not driven herself anywhere in 3 years. He drove her to a clinic appointment. He carried her bag. He waited. His third stop was a hardware store run by a family who had lost half their inventory to a water leak in September, and he spent 2 hours helping them repair a section of shelving that had warped beyond usefulness. He refused every offer of payment with a small gesture of his hand, the same gesture each time, a kind of calm dismissal that was neither modest nor performative. It was simply final. Emily drove home before he did, and sat at the kitchen table and tried to make sense of what she had seen. Her mind, trained on motive and precedent, kept searching for the angle. People did things for reasons. There was always a reason. She cycled through the possibilities. He wanted recognition. He was building social capital. He was compensating for something. He was positioning himself in the community. None of the explanations fit. He had turned down money. He had left before the gratitude was finished. He had done it again the next day and the day after that, and nobody in Millhaven seemed to find it unusual. When she asked a woman at the bakery about Noah, the woman had looked at her with the uncomplicated warmth of someone describing a familiar piece of the landscape. "That's just Noah," she said. "He's always been like that." Emily did not know what to do with that answer. She confronted him about it, or tried to. She chose the word confronted deliberately, because that was how it felt in her head, but what it looked like in practice was the two of them standing in the kitchen after breakfast while she said she had noticed he went out early, and could she ask what he was doing. Noah poured himself a second cup of coffee and said she was welcome to ask. She asked. He explained, briefly and without elaboration. He helped people when he could. He had the time. It was not a difficult equation. She told him she found it hard to believe someone would give that much, without expecting something in return. Noah considered that for a moment, and then said, "Not everything needs a return." She opened her mouth to argue, and found that she had no argument. Not because she agreed, but because the way he said it made the very concept of arguing feel beside the point. She spent the afternoon turning it over. Her professional life had been built on the premise that everything had a return. Every hour billed, every relationship cultivated, every favor granted, each had been part of a system she had constructed with the same deliberate architecture she brought to legal arguments. She had not thought of it as cynicism. She had thought of it as intelligence, as understanding how the world actually worked beneath the polished surface of how people claimed it worked. And Noah had looked at her across the kitchen in his unhurried way, and dismantled the entire framework with 6 words. She found herself irritated. She also found herself, quietly and against her will, wondering whether she had been wrong about something fundamental for a very long time. She did not share this thought with Noah. She was not yet ready to concede it, even to herself. But it was there, turning over in the back of her mind the way a question does when the answer is already present, and you are simply not yet willing to look at it directly. It was 3 days later that she saw the moment that stopped her entirely. She had come with him, by then, under the pretense of having nothing better to do, which was almost true. They were at the home of a woman in her late 70s named Margaret, who had asked Noah weeks ago if he could look at her back steps. The steps had been rotting quietly for 2 seasons, and Margaret had not been able to afford to have them fixed, and had been too proud to mention it to anyone who might feel obligated to help. Noah had brought materials, and he worked in the yard while Emily sat on a garden chair and watched and tried to decide whether this whole arrangement was therapeutic or irritating. When the steps were done, Margaret had come out to look at them. And then, she had turned to Noah. And something in her expression had changed, gone soft and open in the way faces go, when a person has been holding something too long, and she had pulled him into an embrace and begun to cry. Not loudly, quietly, the way people cry when they are relieved of something heavy. Emily watched Noah hold the old woman's shoulders with the steady, unhurried patience of someone who understood that this moment was not about him. His face was turned slightly away. He did not say it was nothing. He did not say anything at all. He just held still. Emily looked away and stared at the fence and felt something shift in her chest that she did not have a word for yet. She began asking questions after that. Not to Noah directly, not at first. She asked the people of Millhaven, and they told her things willingly. The way people in small towns tell the stories of the people they love. With a kind of careful pride, she learned that Noah's wife, Diane, had died of an illness when their son was 11 years old. She learned that the years after had been hard in ways that Noah had never described to anyone publicly, that he had worked every hour available to him and still come up short some months. That there had been a period of a few years that his closest friends still referred to only as the hard time without elaborating further. She learned that his son, Marcus, was now 26 and working as an engineer in Seattle, that they spoke regularly, that Noah was quietly proud of him in the way of fathers who do not need to announce their pride. She learned that Noah had begun helping people in the community slowly, without announcement, in the years after Marcus left home, as if the space that had been filled with raising a child had simply redirected itself towards something else. The night the power went out changed things between them in a way that Emily had not anticipated. It was a Thursday in mid-October, and a storm had been building all day. By 8 o'clock, the lights were gone, and the house was dark except for the candles Noah lit, with the ease of a man who had prepared for this more than once. They sat at the kitchen table across from each other, the candle between them, making the room feel smaller and softer than it ever had in ordinary light. They talked, not about logistics or schedules or the minor negotiations of shared space, but actually talked, the kind of conversation that happens when there is no phone and no screen, and no noise to fill the gaps with something easier. Emily had asked him, at some point, whether he ever got lonely. It was a question she had not meant to ask aloud. Noah had looked at the candle for a moment before answering. He said that loneliness was something he had learned to distinguish from solitude. He said there had been a time when the two felt indistinguishable. He said losing Diane had taken him years to move through, not around, and that there was a difference. He said there had been stretches of time where he had not known who he was, without the shape of another person's life next to his. He said all of this quietly, without drama, as if he were describing the weather. Emily listened without speaking, which was unusual for her. When he was done, she did not say she was sorry, because it seemed insufficient. She said she had not known that kind of grief, and he said he hoped she wouldn't. There was a silence after that which was not uncomfortable. Emily sat with the quiet for longer than she expected. She was not a woman who did silence easily. Her apartment in the city had always been full of noise she'd manufactured for herself, background television, podcasts running while she worked, music she wasn't actually listening to because the absence of sound had always felt too much like an absence of progress. Here, in the candlelight, with Noah sitting across from her and rain running down the kitchen window, the quiet felt like a different substance entirely. It felt inhabited. She realized, with something close to embarrassment, that she could not remember the last time she had sat still in a room with another person without either working or performing. She could not remember the last time a conversation had left her feeling less defended rather than more. She told Noah this, in a roundabout way, and he listened with his particular quality of attention, the kind that made you feel your words were being received rather than merely processed. He said he thought a lot of people built noise into their lives because they were afraid of what they might hear if they let it go quiet. She asked if he had been afraid of that. He said yes, once. She asked what had changed. He said, after a moment, I ran out of things to drown it out with. So I started listening instead. The candle between them burned lower. The rain continued. Emily found that she had nothing to add to that, and for once did not feel the need to. She noticed the photograph the following morning. It was tucked behind a row of books on the shelf in the living room, small enough that she had walked past it a dozen times without registering it. She registered it now because the angle of the morning light caught the frame differently, and she stopped and looked. It was a photograph of a woman, younger than Emily, with dark hair and a wide, unhurried smile. She was looking at the camera with the ease of someone who did not need to perform happiness, because she simply had it. Emily stood in front of that photograph for a long moment. She did not touch it. She put it back exactly as it had been. Something had loosened in Emily by that point. Some mechanism she had kept tightly wound for longer than she could account for. She began going with Noah in the mornings without explanation, and he accepted her company without remark. She helped him, clumsily at first and then with more confidence, carry materials and hold things steady while he worked and talked to the people they helped in the way that came easily to her, the direct and focused attention of someone trained to make people feel heard. She was good at it. She was surprised to find that she was good at it. She had always thought of her professional skill with people as a tool, something she deployed strategically. Out here it was not strategy. It was just her, talking to a man whose gutters hadn't been cleaned since spring, or a woman who needed someone to listen while her steps were being fixed. It felt different from anything she had done in years. It felt, and she spent several days refusing to admit this to herself, like enough. She laughed more. She slept better. She cooked dinner one evening, and it was mediocre, and Noah ate it without complaint and told her the garlic was good. And she had laughed at that in a way that surprised her. Her friends noticed. Rachel called on a Thursday evening and said, "You sound different," in the careful voice of someone testing a theory. Emily had said, "Different how?" And Rachel had said, "I don't know." Slower, like you're actually in the room you're in. Emily had thought about that after she hung up. She thought it was possibly the most accurate thing anyone had said to her in years. The email came on a Monday morning in November. It was from the senior partner at a firm in Chicago, a position she had wanted for 3 years, the kind of offer that arrived once if you were very good at your job and a little lucky besides. The salary was significant. The title was exactly what she had aimed for. The start date was in 3 weeks. Emily read it twice, sitting at the kitchen table with her coffee. And then she read it a third time, and she noticed that her reaction to it was not what she had expected her reaction to be. There was satisfaction, certainly. There was the recognition of a goal achieved, but there was also, underneath that, something that felt unexpectedly like dread. And she did not want to examine that too closely. She told Noah that evening. He listened without interrupting, and when she was done, he said it sounded like something she had worked hard for, and he thought she should take it. He said it simply, and without hesitation, the way he said most things. Emily had waited for something more. She had waited for him to pause, to qualify, to say something that would indicate the decision was not entirely straightforward. He did not. He got up and brought their dishes to the sink, and she sat there feeling a frustration she could not fully explain. She had not wanted him to tell her to stay. She told herself she had not wanted that. She was still telling herself that, when she went to bed, the distance between them arrived quietly in the days that followed. Emily was polite, and Noah was his usual self, which was to say that he showed almost nothing outwardly, and so it was impossible to tell whether he felt the shift at all, or whether she was simply projecting her own unease onto the arrangement. She began to wonder about the things he had not said. She turned them over in her mind, the way she would turn over gaps in testimony, looking for what had been omitted, and why. She wondered whether his encouragement had been genuine, or whether it had been something else entirely, a kind of release, a door held open because it was easier than asking someone to stay. She found out by accident. She had been in the hallway, looking for a jacket she had left near the door, when she heard Noah's voice coming from the back porch, low and unhurried, unmistakably in the middle of a phone conversation. She had not intended to listen. She had intended to get her jacket and go. But his voice had carried in the way voices carry on cold November evenings, when the air is still and the windows are thin, and she had stood in the hallway with her hand on the doorframe, and she had heard him say her name. He was talking to someone, a friend, a man whose voice she could not quite make out on the other end. He was saying that yes, he thought she was going to take the job. He was saying that she should. He said that she was one of the most capable people he had met in a long time, and that it would be a waste for her not to go back to the thing she was built for. And then there was a pause, and then Noah said, quietly and without self-pity, that it was going to be very quiet without her, and that he had not expected that. He said he had not been prepared for how much light she had brought into the house. He stopped talking for a moment, and Emily could hear him exhale slowly through the screen of the back door. He said he wasn't going to say anything to her about it, because it wasn't fair to put that on someone who had never asked to be there in the first place. Emily did not move for a long time. When she finally walked back to her room, she sat on the edge of the bed and pressed her hands together and stared at the floor. The thing she had been telling herself she wasn't feeling had a name now, and it sat in the center of her chest with a weight that was not unpleasant but was undeniable. She had spent the better part of 3 months telling herself that what she felt around Noah was gratitude or admiration or the ordinary warmth of proximity. She had used every intellectual tool she owned to categorize and contain it. She understood, sitting there on the edge of the spare room bed in Millhaven, that she had been wrong about all of it. She still took the job. She told herself later that this had been cowardice, but that was not entirely right. The truth was more complicated. The truth was that she was 34 years old, and she had built her life on a particular set of values, and she was not sure she knew who she was if she walked away from the thing she had spent a decade working toward just because a man in a flannel shirt had made her feel quiet for the first time in years. She was not sure that was love. She was not sure it wasn't. She packed her suitcase in the early days of November and tried to feel decisive about it. Noah helped her carry things to the car. He made 2 trips with the same efficiency he brought to everything, and then stood in the driveway in the cold morning air while she checked that she had everything. The taillights of a neighbor's car passed on the road. Neither of them spoke. Emily kept waiting for him to say something, to offer the one sentence that would give her permission to stay or go with something resembling peace of mind. He looked at her steadily and without expectation, and she understood, watching him, that he had already decided not to ask anything of her and that he was not going to change his mind. She hugged him. His arms came around her shoulders briefly and firmly, and he stepped back. "Have a good life, Emily," he said, not unkindly, just truly. She got in the car and drove away, and did not let herself look in the rearview mirror until she had turned out of sight. The weeks that followed were not what she had expected. She had expected to feel triumphant. She had expected to feel the clean surge of satisfaction that came with achievement, the particular pleasure of standing inside a thing she had worked for and finding it as good as she had imagined. The apartment in Chicago was beautiful. The office was everything she had wanted. Her colleagues were sharp and ambitious, and the work was demanding in the way she had always wanted her work to be demanding. She should have been happy. She was, by every external measure, exactly where she had told herself she wanted to be. But she woke up before 5 in the mornings, and the silence was wrong. The city silence was not the silence she had learned to live inside. It was the silence of a place in which 10,000 people were awake in their separate apartments, all of them equally contained. The sound of everyone's privacy pressed together into a particular kind of aloneness. She noticed the difference without wanting to. She noticed it every morning when she made her coffee and looked out through the floor-to-ceiling window at the lake below. Beautiful and correct and entirely impersonal. She thought about the kitchen in Millhaven. She thought about the mismatched mugs and the herbs on the back step and the sound of gravel under tires in the early dark. She thought about the way Noah set 2 plates without asking, as if her presence at his table was simply a fact of the world that required no negotiation. She told herself it would pass. It did not pass. It settled in instead, the way things settle in when they are trying to tell you something you have been refusing to hear. Her work was good. Her arguments were sharp. She won a case in her 3rd week that her senior partners described as exceptional. She sat in the conference room afterward and smiled in all the right places and went home and stood in her kitchen and felt, clearly and without confusion, that she was in the wrong place, not the wrong city, not the wrong firm, the wrong life, or not the wrong life exactly, but a life with a particular thing missing that she had not understood was there until it wasn't. She began to catalog it without meaning to. The feeling was not dramatic. It did not arrive as grief or as crisis. It arrived in small and specific moments. The Sunday afternoon when she walked along the lakefront for an hour and passed 200 people without making eye contact with a single one. The evening she heated soup from a can because she had not learned to cook properly until Millhaven and the convenience of her Chicago kitchen made it easy to forget. The morning she woke up, and her first thought was not about the day ahead but about what Noah was doing at that particular hour in that particular house. She knew what he was doing. He was making coffee and pulling on work boots and driving out into the early dark to fix something for someone who had not asked him to. She lay in her beautiful apartment with the lake view and the high thread count sheets, and she understood with complete clarity that competence without purpose was just performance, and that she had been performing brilliantly for a very long time. She called Rachel on a Tuesday evening. Rachel answered on the 2nd ring and did not say "I told you so," which was more restraint than Emily had expected and more than she deserved. She said, "I think I made a mistake." Rachel was quiet for a moment and then said, "I know. But you had to go find that out for yourself." Emily sat on the edge of her bed and stared at her hands and said, "What if he's moved on?" Rachel said, "He hasn't." Emily said, "How do you know?" Rachel said. Because I know Noah. She paused. Also because he wrote you a letter and gave it to me. And I've been waiting for you to be ready for it. The letter came from Rachel, handwritten, which was unusual enough that Emily sat down to read it at the kitchen table, rather than standing at the counter. Rachel explained that Noah had written something, weeks ago, in a moment she would not elaborate on, and had not sent it, and had eventually given it to her because he did not know what else to do with it, and that she, Rachel, had made the executive decision that Emily deserved to read it. The note was tucked inside the envelope, one page in Noah's handwriting, which was steady and simple and did not embellish. He wrote that he was grateful for the 3 months she had spent in his house. He wrote that she had reminded him, without trying to, that a home is not just the physical arrangement of rooms but the quality of attention brought to the people inside it. He wrote that she was one of the most alive people he had ever had the pleasure of knowing, and that he hoped her new life gave her everything she was looking for. He did not ask her to come back. He did not say he missed her. He only said that, whatever she found ahead of her, he hoped it was worth what she was made of. Emily read it twice. Then she set it down on the table and looked at it for a while. Then she picked up her phone and booked a train ticket for the following morning. She did not text ahead. She arrived in Millhaven on a Thursday afternoon. A cold, clear day in early December, with frost still white on the grass at the edges of the road. She drove the route she had memorized without meaning to, and pulled onto the gravel, and sat in the car for a moment, looking at the house. The lights were on inside. Smoke from the chimney. A pair of work boots on the porch step. She got out. Noah came around the side of the house carrying a length of wood. He saw her and stopped. He did not say anything immediately. He stood there in the cold holding the wood and looking at her with an expression she had not seen on his face before. Something careful and wondering and entirely unguarded. She crossed the gravel toward him, and he set the wood down against the side of the house without taking his eyes off her. She said, "I read your letter." He said, "I know. Rachel told me. She said, you should have sent it." He said, "Maybe." She said, "I came back because I want to explain something to myself out loud, and I think I need you to hear it." He waited. He was very good at waiting. She told him what she had found in Chicago. She told him it was everything she had aimed for, and that it was real and good, and that she did not regret the years she had spent working toward it. She told him she had stood at that window and looked at that lake every morning and understood, slowly, and then all at once, that success was not the same thing as belonging. She told him that she had spent most of her adult life believing that being capable was the same as being complete, and that she had learned, somewhere between the rotting back steps of Margaret's house and the cold November driveway of his own, that it was not. She told him she was not there because she had failed. She was there because she had figured out what she was actually looking for, and it had turned out to be something she had already found by accident. Noah listened to all of it, without interrupting. When she was done, he looked at her for a long moment and then said, "You should know that I was not going to ask you to stay." She said, "I know." He said, "I meant it when I said I wanted you to have a good life." She said, "I know that too." She looked at him steadily. "I'm telling you that this is it. This is part of what a good life looks like for me. I'm not here asking for permission. I'm here because I want to be." Something moved through his expression then, slow and quiet. The way weather moves across open country. He reached out and took her hand. His grip was warm and unhurried, and entirely certain. They stood there in the cold in front of the house for a long moment, not speaking, not needing to. The late afternoon light was going gold across the tops of the oak trees. Somewhere down the road a dog was barking at nothing in particular. Emily looked at the house, the old boards and the smoke from the chimney and the boots on the porch, and she felt something she recognized as peace, not the absence of difficulty, but the presence of something solid underneath her feet. Noah's hand was still in hers when they went inside. The months that followed were not without adjustment. Emily did not quit her career. She restructured it. She negotiated an arrangement that allowed her to work remotely 3 days a week and travel to Chicago twice a month. A compromise her firm accepted because she was worth the accommodation, and they both knew it. She kept the apartment in Chicago for the nights she needed to be there, and spent the rest of her time in Millhaven, in the small house, with the low ceilings, and the mismatched mugs, and the herbs on the back step. She learned to cook properly. She learned which neighbors needed what and when. She learned the geography of the town in the quiet way that comes from living inside it, rather than passing through. Noah's mornings continued as they always had, and she joined them as often as her schedule allowed. They worked side by side without needing to explain the rhythm to each other. She brought her professional skills to some of what they did, helping people navigate paperwork and insurance forms, and the small bureaucratic tangles that accumulate quietly in people's lives without anyone noticing until it becomes a crisis. She was good at it in a way that mattered, and she felt the difference between mattering and achieving in a way she had not understood before. By spring, they had an idea. It began the way most good ideas begin, as a half-formed conversation over coffee that kept returning in different forms until it was too concrete to ignore. There were people in Millhaven and the towns around it who needed the kind of help that fell between the formal categories of assistance, not poor enough for government programs, not connected enough for private networks, but running out of options in the quiet way that happens when no one is paying attention. Emily knew how to build structures. Noah knew how to show up. Together, they drafted a proposal for a community resource center. A small, impractical space where people could come for help with legal questions and home repairs and health navigation and the dozen other things that become crises when you have no one to ask. They found a building on the edge of town that had been empty for 3 years. They found funding through a combination of a small grant, local donations, and Emily's own savings, which were substantial and had been sitting in accounts she had never found a sufficiently meaningful use for until now. By autumn, the center was open 2 days a week at first, and then 4. Emily threw herself into the work with the same intensity she had once reserved for litigation, but it felt different in her body. The stress of building something in Millhaven did not hollow her out the way courtroom pressure had. It tired her in the physical, satisfying way that sleep could resolve, rather than the anxious exhaustion of a mind that would not stop running the numbers at 2 in the morning. She wrote grant applications with the same precision she had once brought to legal briefs. She sat across from frightened people and explained what their options were in plain and honest language. And she found that the clarity she had once deployed as a tool for winning arguments was, in this context, simply kindness. She negotiated with local businesses for donations, the way she had once negotiated settlements. She was very good at it. And for the first time in years, being good at something felt like it was pointing in the right direction, rather than simply proving she was pointed correctly. It was a Saturday in late October when Emily saw the moment that settled everything into place. She was sitting on the steps of the center, finishing a cup of coffee and reviewing a set of documents, when she noticed Noah across the small yard, talking to a young man she did not recognize, someone who had come in that morning with a look she recognized, the particular blankness of a person who has run out of ideas and is not sure anyone will hear them. Noah was listening with his full and quiet attention, leaning slightly forward with his elbows on his knees, not offering solutions yet, just listening in the way that told the other person they were worth being heard. He looked up once and caught her eye across the yard and gave her a small, unhurried smile, and then returned his attention entirely to the young man in front of him. Emily watched them for a long time. She watched Noah tilt his head as the young man said something. She watched him nod once, slowly, and then say something in return that made the young man's shoulders drop by a fraction, the small physical release of a person who has just been told that someone understands. She had seen that gesture before, in Margaret's yard, in the pharmacy parking lot, on a dozen cold mornings she had spent driving the streets of Millhaven. The gesture was always the same. Noah never forced it and never performed it. He simply created the conditions for it to happen, quietly, without announcement, the way you clear a space and wait for something to come and rest there. Emily sat there with her coffee going cold in her hands, and she thought about the card game on a rainy Friday in October, the bet she had taken out of pride, the driveway she had stood in with her suitcase and her certainty, and her total inability to imagine that this place and this man would matter to her. She thought about all the things she had believed she was building, the career and the title, and the careful fortress of competence. And she thought about what she had actually needed, which was someone who paid attention, and a place where attention mattered. She thought about the version of herself who had sat at Rachel's table and said she could get along with anyone, anywhere. And she recognized that woman with something between affection and pity. That woman had been telling the truth as she understood it. She simply had not understood very much yet. She had confused the ability to perform in any room with the ability to genuinely belong in one. She had confused independence with freedom. She had confused being difficult to rattle with being at peace. The distance between those pairs of words, she now understood, was the whole distance between a life and a good one. She was not certain she had arrived at a good one. She was certain, for the first time, that she was moving in the right direction. She thought that she had walked into Millhaven thinking she was doing Noah a favor by tolerating his company, and she understood now, with the complete and rueful clarity of someone who has finally caught up with the truth, that it had been entirely the other way around. The best things in a life rarely arrive in the shape we expect them to. They arrive sideways, through a card game gone wrong or a driveway we didn't choose, or a person who asks a question we haven't prepared an answer for. They arrive in the form of someone who gets up at 5 in the morning not because anyone asked them to, but because it is simply what they believe a person should do. What Emily Carter came to understand, not all at once but slowly, and then with complete certainty, was that she had spent years building a life around the things she could win and almost missed the only thing worth keeping. She did not miss it. She drove 3 hours and stood in a cold gravel driveway and said, "I want to be here." And that turned out to be the most important thing she had ever argued. Not every achievement is a trophy on a shelf. Some of the most significant things we accomplish are the parts of ourselves we finally agree to let go of, the armor we wore because we didn't know we were safe, the distance we kept because we didn't know we were allowed to be close. Emily had been brilliant and capable, and entirely defended, and what changed her was not failure and not catastrophe, but the ordinary, repeated, unspectacular witness of a man who chose, every single morning, to give his time to people who had not earned it by any conventional measure. She watched him do it and she understood, without anyone telling her, that this was what it looked like to live without waste. Not the waste of money or opportunity, but the waste of the days themselves. The ordinary days that pass unremarked while we are waiting for the important ones to arrive. The important ones, it turned out, were these. The cold morning with the frost on the grass. The sound of gravel under tires in the blue-gray dark. The mismatched mug pressed into her hands without ceremony. The question asked with genuine curiosity and no agenda attached to the answer. The hand that reached out and held on without requiring anything in return. These were the things. These had always been the things. Emily Carter had simply needed 3 months, a lost card game, and one remarkably patient man to understand that the life worth building was not the one she had planned, but the one she had stumbled into by accident and been wise enough, finally, to choose.